I was wrong. I was so deep in the conspiracy theory that Depp's team created that I had no idea how brainwashed I was until I saw a transcript of a certain text message and, more importantly, the date it was sent. And that's when it all clicked for me. Hi, my name is Sullivan Sweeny, he, him, peer support certified, RBA of Psychology and Literature, and relevant for today's video, a survivor. I have to retract what I firmly believe was a huge mistake caused by worldwide brainwashing and my own ignorance of facts that, harrowingly enough, were dismissed in the Virginia trial, which was, at the time, my primary source of information. This video is my apology to Amber Heard and my attempt to heal the damage I've done to her reputation with my voice in the past. I understand a lot of my audience is firmly Team Johnny, and I understand why you believe that he was like this great guy before he sank to her level. Because, I used to think that too, but all I ask of you today is that you please hear me out before you spread animosity toward Amber. I assure you all, campaigning for the falsely accused, male domestic assault survivors, and innocent until proven guilty all remain important to me. But strong evidence suggests that Amber was reacting to years of abuse before hitting back. Part 1. From supporting Depp to challenging him. On the off chance that this video goes viral and ruins my f***ing life, this video is strictly my opinion as protected by the First Amendment. Also, don't harass anybody. This video essay is part reflection, part evidence, and kind of ranty. Timestamped for your convenience. So when Amber first joined the Me Too movement, I wasn't sure who to believe. I didn't want to believe her, because I was so attached to films like Edward Scissorhands and Sweeney Todd. At the same time, I didn't want to totally reject what she was saying. The media claimed she couldn't possibly be a victim because she was fighting for temporary spousal support, calling her a gold digger. And the comments were brutal, and I thought, well, what's wrong with being a gold digger? Old men use women for their bodies all the time, and that's just called marriage. But lots of battered women sided with Depp, which is not surprising if you think about it for 2 seconds, but we're not really going there today. They were all saying that they just wanted to get out of there and didn't care about money. Survival was compensation enough. So why did she need cash? So naturally, after all this, Heard then withdrew the request for spousal support, stating that the way she was painted had been a part of a coordinated media campaign. It didn't work, though. People were still angry. Fast forward to after the defamation suit was filed, but before any lawsuits unfolded, Johnny Depp's team dropped what would turn out to be the most successful innocence campaign of the decade. Around this time, I encountered one of many audio leaks from Johnny Depp's team. I can't remember which one, but I remember how it made me feel. It was probably one of these clips.
Tell the world, Johnny. Tell them, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, man, I'm a victim too of domestic violence. See how many people believe or side with you.
I didn't punch you, by the way. I'm sorry that I didn't hit you across the face in a proper slap, but I was hitting you. It was not punching you. Babe, you're not punched.
Don't tell me what it feels like to be punched.
You've been a lot of fights. You've been around a long time. I know. Yeah.
No, when you fucking have a close.
You didn't get punched. You got hit. I'm sorry I hit you like this, but I did not punch you.
We can stop there. You've probably heard them all by now. I know a lot about domestic violence. I've lived through it more than once, studied it, but my knowledge doesn't always prevent me from getting manipulated. So when I heard the audio, I actually started crying. I was triggered, to say the least. I felt betrayed by Amber because I heard gaslighting, essentially, and felt horrible for Johnny, hating myself for ever doubting his innocence. Depp's team didn't claim he had reactively abused Amber, no. What they did was far more clever. They made people like me think they had come up with it on their own. And when people like me followed the logic of our training to recognize the Darvo abuse pattern, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender, we jumped to the conclusion that Amber was flipping the script. It's typical in domestic violence narratives, after all. These things can get muddy. Very few of us considered that it may be the other way around. because Depp had been a small part of our lives since the 90s, meaning he had built more rapport with the public. Plus, the small pretty girl being the real villain, that's a plot twist. That garnered a lot of attention in the media. It was a juicy story, and it was irresistible to Depp's large fan base. The conspiracy was also all over YouTube, absolutely flooding it with entire channels being made to console people who didn't want their favorite childhood movies being linked to a monster. Meanwhile, most Amber fans were introduced to her by Depp to begin with. She was disposable and wanted us to see Depp's darker side. And as the Darvo conspiracy unfolded, we began to emotionally cherry-pick evidence based off our shock and upset from the leaked audio. And as I would later find out, there may have been bots defending Johnny as well. I'm not going to get into that rabbit hole. I've linked to the Who Trolled Amber podcast in my description under sources. But anyway, after hearing the leak and seeing pictures of the finger thing that has since been debunked, by the way.
Now we're talking about Australia. Okay. Yes.
You hear that? And you said the day I chopped my finger off? Let's play it again. Let's
That'd
do it
be
again.
great, thank you.
Fight you're talking about. I don't know.
I'm talking about Australia, the day that
Now
I
we're
shot
talking
my
about
finger.
Australia. Okay.
Are you sure that's
Yeah, let's do it one more time. 'Cause
what
you
I'm
actually
saying?
don't.
Or is it the day that I got my finger chopped off?
No, you say the day that I chopped my finger off. So let's play it one more time because I think I left out the word that. It says the day that I chopped my finger off.
Fight you're talking about. I don't know.
I'm talking about Australia, the day that
Now
I
we're
shot
talking
my
about
finger.
Australia. Okay.
What followed was an emotional and immature video reaction where I ranted borderline incoherently and expressed complete disbelief in Amber. It is the worst video I have ever made. I deleted it a couple years later after realizing, Johnny wasn't, innocent, and after the trial, I made a new video about how narcissists abuse you and flip the script when you fight back. Narcissism here being a social trait, obviously not to be confused with the personality disorder. At the time, I did feel it was important to let people know, no matter how messy things get, mutual abuse is not real, and I felt like I was genuinely helping by taking a trial from pop psychology and turning it into a learning experience. The thought was there, I guess, but I now believe I called it way wrong when I said Amber was the main abuser. Yeah, the video had true information about reactive abuse and stuff, but it leaned too heavily into illustrating my example with the findings of what I now see as a deeply unfair trial. Despite this, the video went unchallenged overall. I don't think I even got one comment in support of Amber. At that time, pretty much everyone believed Depp. Now this case is kind of facing a feminist resurgence, though, as certain documents are now unsealed and easy to access. An appeal brief was released summarizing incidents of verbal abuse and sexual violence that Amber reported to psychologist Dr. Bonnie Jacobs early in their relationship, 2012 early. It reads, in August 2012, Heard reported Depp was in a rage, accused her of cheating, and threw a glass by her head. In September 2012, Heard reported Depp was violent and, quote, ripped her nightgown, threw her on bed, tried to have sex but couldn't get an erection, became more angry. That's terrifying. And on November 15, 2012, Heard reported sometimes Johnny becomes verbally and sexually abusive. And that's all in 2012, guys. I would dig deeper into this, but I don't want to get unnecessarily graphic and triggering to make my point. That's not what this channel is about. I don't want to make it like some shock value channel. We don't need to go there. But I will add that her mental health team did see her injuries, and they have no reason to lie. If anything, they would get in more trouble and could actually harm the trajectory of their entire career if they did. They're mandated reporters who received actual training on how to recognize and what to do in domestic violence situations. This is key evidence that didn't make it to the trial. Something you will soon see is a pattern. Now, I initially did almost no research other than watching the trial and reading some news articles, and that was a mistake. I can research to the depth I please, unlike the jurors of the trial who were limited by what little evidence the judge allowed to be discussed in court. And now that things have simmered down a bit, it's easier to research because there isn't like a depth bias fog all over the news. And this research has led me to the conclusion that however bad you think you know the justice system is, it's actually even worse. I didn't fully understand that back then. I couldn't see the forest through the trees because of that strategically edited audio leak that got me sobbing, feeling sorry for him. And plus, he had been my favorite actor for years. He held a piece of my childhood, and it wasn't easy to turn my back on that, you know? But my guilt trip doesn't change that Johnny had endless resources to campaign to the public for years before laying the groundwork for this trial. You know, in my opinion, he didn't just manipulate Amber, he manipulated us by poisoning the well. Poisoning the well is a manipulation tactic where you prime your audience with adverse information about your opponent to preemptively attack them. And it worked like a charm. Before the trial even began, Amber Heard had already lost because everybody prioritized the first bit of evidence they heard. That damn audio leak. This works because of a psychological effect called primacy. We are more likely to remember the first piece of information we hear, as opposed to all that counter evidence in the middle. And so I basically went to bed with that stupid audio leak priming my brain, and then woke up a few years later with a huge hangover. What had I taken part in? Oh my God. Part 2. The buried evidence versus the celebrity endorsement. Depp sued Amber in Virginia, a state where neither of them had ties, and the Washington Post, which published Amber's op-ed, is located in Washington, D.C., obviously, and distributed to that area and online. I never questioned why the trial was in Virginia at the time. It would have been more convenient for him to sue Amber locally, but he was actually able to choose Virginia because it was where the Washington Post's online servers are located. Yes, you heard me right. Their servers. He claimed jurisdiction over their online servers and wasn't laughed out of court. How did that happen? So unlike New York or California, Virginia has weak anti-SLAPP laws. And you're probably like, what are those? These laws are made to protect free speech and dismiss frivolous lawsuits. So, you know, you can say what you want so people can't sue you. Those laws protect that. And hear me out. This was an extremely frivolous lawsuit, okay? The op-ed never mentions Johnny Depp. She didn't directly name him or even really infer him. Inference is legal jargon, and in the context of the defamation case, it basically means that any reasonable person would read that and think, oh, Johnny Depp. Frankly, years had passed and no one was really talking about Johnny Depp anymore. You know, him losing his starring role was only related to the op-ed in terms of post-hoc. So what's post-hoc? Post-hoc is a logical fallacy where one assumes after, therefore because of. In other words, since he wasn't offered a role in Pirates 6 after the op-ed was the cause of him not getting Pirates 6. And, you know, this just isn't true. Disney executive Tina Newman actually confirmed this. So Elaine Bredehoft, one of Heard's attorneys, asked her, are you aware of any decision maker within Disney who has ever said they are not casting Johnny Depp in Pirates 6 or any other role because of Amber Heard's op-ed? And she said no.
Are you aware of any document in Disney's emails or in their IT system or anywhere that contains Amber Heard's op-ed from December of 2018?
I mean, no, not that I'm aware.
Okay. Are you aware of any decision maker within Disney who has ever said they are not casting Johnny Depp in Pirates 6 or any other role because of Amber Heard's op-ed?
No.
Disney's deposition evidence showed that they hadn't made a firm offer to Johnny for Pirates 6. The likely reason he didn't get it? Unprofessional behavior. Talent agent Tracy Jacobs testified that Depp was routinely late, and also his drug use had been an open secret for years now. For example, let's look at this Hollywood Reporter article that was circulating around the time. But Hollywood decision makers may be less forgiving in light of the UK trial's copious drug references. Cocaine, alcohol, Xanax, alcohol, oxycodone, magic mushrooms, and ecstasy. And there goes my monetization, so hit like if you want people to see the video. Depp had been earning his $20 million plus upfront paydays from the major studios, all owned by increasingly risk-averse and reputationally sensitive publicly traded media giants. And while shooting Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales in Australia, Depp swallowed 8 ecstasy pills at once, according to testimony in the UK case, and embarked on a campaign of terror aimed at Heard. It culminated with the tip of his finger being sliced off, which resulted in his being flown back to Los Angeles for surgery. Pirates was forced to shut down production for 2 weeks, costing the studio some $350,000 a day. Depp claims that Heard threw a bottle of alcohol at him, injuring his finger. Okay, so let's do the math. $350,000 per day. I don't know how many days are considered work days in the industry, but that's up to nearly $500 million. Imagine this on top of his inflated, 90s Dream Boy salary, and all of a sudden he doesn't seem like the first choice for the sequel. The movie industry is more of a business than an art, and the more you have to invest, the less profits the bigwigs take home. His career had been declining for years because of his substance abuse. I don't see how that's Amber's fault or how his already dead career was worth $50 million. Most courts would have thrown this out. However, Virginia's weak anti-SLAPP laws kept Amber from getting the case dismissed early on. Virginia also allows televised lawsuits, making it to where the public could get involved, allowing him to turn it into a viral publicity stunt. In a case with a 90s heartthrob for a plaintiff who again released strategic audio to regain control of the narrative, that invites a nationwide jury that is already in Depp's favor. Also, jurors in Virginia, which is a swing state, are more likely to be less into Hollywood politics. Less Me Too and more susceptible to Depp's charm. So, all that had the ball in Depp's court early on anyway. When the 2020 civil libel case against The Sun was excluded from the trial, I didn't think much of it because, it was a libel case. I thought it was reasonable to exclude a UK libel case against a magazine from a US defamation case against a former spouse. But I was wrong to assume that what was discussed in the UK trial was irrelevant. It turns out in the UK, the burden actually rested on the publication to prove that Johnny was a wife beater, and that they did. Had I known at the time that the reason Depp lost that libel case was because they were able to prove not just 1 or 2, but a whopping 12 of 14 of the alleged incidents of him beating Amber were substantially true, that would have given me and billions of others room for pause at the very least. And I suspect that's exactly why his team wanted that excluded, because that's 12 court-certified domestic violence incidents that the jury never heard of. And 12 court-certified domestic violence incidents that an entire audience watching at home never heard of. That alone would verify that Johnny abused Amber. The very simple next step that would follow would be proving that Johnny abused Amber first, therefore his abuse of her could not have been reactive like he claims. Should be simple, but that didn't happen because that's not how the justice system works. You could go to an elementary school classroom, tell them the years it's happened, and ask who started it. And the kids would all raise their hands and say, Johnny! This case shouldn't be that complicated. But again, that's not how the justice system works. Common sense has no part in it. Now, from what it looks like to me, her lawyers were counting on being able to use the previous UK case against The Sun to defend Amber, and when that was blocked, it was like the rug was pulled out from under them. So I can see why there were times they had to rely on theatrics, like when they brought out a bruise cover-up palette that they claimed Amber used to cover her bruises during the marriage, and Milani later pointed out that specific product wasn't released in 2017. And the public lost their minds, myself included. Sloppy claims like that ended up backfiring on their client instead of garnering her sympathy. But remember, that wasn't exactly Amber's claim. It was her defense's claim. One of my biggest wake-up calls that were brought up in the UK lawsuit included texts between Depp and Bettany. The exchange went as follows. Depp said, "Let's burn Amber." "I'm not sure we should burn Amber," wrote Bettany. "She is delightful company and pleasing on the eye. We could, of course, do the English course of action and perform a drowning test. Thoughts? You have a swimming pool." And Depp replied, "Let's drown her before we burn her. I will fuck her burnt corpse afterwards to make sure she's dead." To which Bettany apparently wrote back, "My thoughts entirely. Let's be certain before we pronounce her a witch." I'll give you a moment to digest that one. So, like a lot of the evidence that was covered in the UK trial, these texts were ruled inadmissible as evidence in the Virginia trial. For emphasis, not only could they not get this already frivolous case dismissed early on because it's obviously frivolous, not only could they not use the results of the UK trial to get it dismissed, but they also couldn't use the evidence that was used in that trial. It's bullshit, okay? This exchange was what made me rethink the case. I was immediately appalled and wondered if being abused by someone could turn you into such a monster that you text your friend about raping her immolated corpse. Reactive abuse is real, yeah, but I thought it was a low depth to stoop to, I mean, what the fuck? Then I realized where it fit into the timeline, and I wanted to throw up. Depp had sent those texts back in 2013, less than a year into their relationship. 2 years before Johnny was able to substantiate any kind of abuse from Amber, yet in that time, Amber was able to substantiate 5 incidents in the UK court case. It's also a year after Amber told her therapists about Depp's sexual and verbal abuse, as we discussed in the beginning. And let's not act like it's normal to talk like this. If people defend this as dark humor and normal guy talk, I'm moving to another solar system. This is disgusting. Like delightful company that deserved to be drowned, burned, and raped post-mortem. What the fuck? It's hard to argue Amber was the main abuser and Depp was the reactive abuser if Depp was always this way, since 2012 at least. Again, I repeat, it's hard to argue that Depp was merely reacting to Amber's abuse if he was always this way.
But Sullivan, Paul Bettany said this on the Tumblr.com.
Known Johnny Depp for years, and through several relationships, he's the sweetest, kindest, gentlest man that I've ever known. Just saying. Yeah, sure, whatever. If he's the sweetest, kindest, gentlest man that you've ever known, why were there texts from him on your phone talking about drowning and burning his girlfriend and raping her corpse, bro? I'm starting to take these celebrity endorsements that he's a soft, fuzzy teddy bear less and less seriously as time passes. A lot of high-profile celebrities stood up for Depp, including Winona Ryder, who I've always loved and thought was overhated, especially back in the 90s. She spoke up for him, but let's not forget that she was barely legal, if legal, when they started dating, and the power imbalance is obvious. She seems to remember the relationship as being incredibly dramatic and described her breakup as her real-life girl interrupted. So, speculation alert incoming. I'm speculating. She didn't allege any abuse, but I fear she may be looking back on the relationship with rose-colored glasses, like to comfort herself. Because she talks like someone who hasn't fully unpacked what's happened to her, if you know what I mean. Still speculating. It's just like she says, I have never seen him be violent to a person before. And, also said in the past that her first boyfriend, quote, used to smash everything. And Johnny was her first boyfriend, her first kiss, her first time, according to her. So, what I am interpreting from this is that Depp would get angry and violently smash things while under the influence. And there's a lot of talk that kind of corroborates this,
Aware that he drank to excess.
I was always aware.
Okay, and can you explain how you were aware of that?
He was drunk all the
time, a lot of the time. Mr. Depp threw a wine bottle across the room, the hotel room on one instance in Las Vegas while we were shooting Fear and Loathing.
Ms. Barker, was it your understanding back then that he was throwing the bottle at you?
I don't know why he threw the bottle.
And when he threw it, was it in your direction?
Yes.
Were there other people standing around you?
Yes.
So he threw it in your direction at a group of people?
Yes.
You told this jury under oath that Mr. Depp was aggressive and trashed a trailer in Hicksville. You didn't expect the manager of the Hicksville property, Morgan Knight, to come forward and testify that that was untrue, did you?
Incorrect. I've already been through trials with this man. I know how many people will come out and support him.
What happened? We were not even fighting this morning. All I did was say sorry.
Did something happen to you this morning? I don't think so. That's crazy. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're crazy.
Have you drunk this whole thing this morning?
Oh, you got this going? You got this going?
I just started it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Really?
And as a teenager, she was a teenager at the time, she was not experienced enough to know that that's not normal in a healthy relationship. That's just not how people should behave in public at all. So when I consider these quotes, all together, while I have no idea how he treated her, it does make me take her defense of him less as gospel. Another woman he had a sexual relationship with, Ellen Barkin, has a completely different view on her from her short relationship with Depp. She testifies he was always drinking and once threw a bottle during a fight in a hotel room. And, this has been like kind of an open secret since the 90s. The tabloids were always going on about it. But, at the time, that was just considered sexy bad boy behavior because it was the 90s and the 90s were trash. So, the framing was less, wow, this guy's a walking red flag, and more like, wow, what a sexy bad boy, doing bad boy things. Don't you want a bad boy complete with a leather jacket? Don't you wish you were Kate Moss? Don't you wish he trashed you like that hotel suite? Part 3. Trash Psychology and the Court of Social Media.
But Amber was crazy, right? She had the whole cluster B, right?
Well, according to Dr. Curry, maybe. To recap, Dr. Curry was the forensic psychologist hired by Depp's team to evaluate Amber. It later came out that she and Depp had dinner together in his home, and she responded like this.
You went to Mr. Depp's home for dinner and drinks before you were hired as an expert in this case, correct?
That's not quite right. I was interviewed at Mr. Depp's home by his legal team. Dinner was served.
And the dinner lasted approximately 3 to 4 hours, correct?
Yes. Dinner and I believe drinks were served.
Okay. And this was before you were hired as an expert, correct?
Yes.
And don't you think that's a little odd that you're getting interviewed by Mr. Depp to decide whether you're going to testify adversely against Amber Heard?
I was interviewed by the legal team.
Okay. And Mr. Depp was present. It was his home, correct?
Yes.
Do you agree that if you did not find something that would be in favor of Mr. Depp and negative to Ms. Heard, that you wouldn't be an expert in this case? That I'm going to bring you into court if you're going to say that Ms. Heard is right and Mr. Depp is wrong, correct?
So as a forensic psychologist, my obligation is to the court, is to the fact finder. I present science regardless of what that science may be. Now, when I take a case, my retainer agreement is explicit about that, and I discuss that with the attorneys.
I'm asking you a question. I'd like you to try to answer my question. You understand that if you found favorably to Ms. Heard and negatively to Mr. Depp, you wouldn't be here, right? You wouldn't be testifying.
Objection speculative.
No, okay, sorry.
Hold on. The objection is speculation.
That's not speculation.
I'll sustain the objection if you want to ask.
My biggest issue is the implication that Amber had essentially the whole cluster B of personality disorders, which consists of narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and histrionic and borderline personality disorders. No, Dr. Curry didn't technically diagnose her with the whole cluster B, just half of it, but the way she worded her testimony led the public to come to that conclusion. Most people don't understand psychology as well as they think they do. So when internet doctors with a TikTok level of education took her list of symptoms and quickly linked it to the whole cluster B, well, the internet does what it does. And I suspect this framing was intentional. While cluster B personality disorders can co-occur, diagnosing two at once during a high-stakes trial was a red flag to many clinicians. They have too many overlapping traits and even diagnostic criteria. And like diagnoses like these, they should be considered over a long period of time, and that's not possible in a legal environment. She had 12 hours with Amber. In my opinion, though, it really doesn't make sense for Amber to be disordered to the extent that Dr. Curry describes and to have made it so far in life. People like that, portraits of the whole cluster B, they usually end up in a psych ward prison by their 18th birthday or whatever. Amber is an extremely educated bookworm. She speaks basic sign language and held full interview in Spanish. She learned to play a piano and a guitar for her appearance on One More Time. She's a focused learner, and her career has always been stable, I noticed. When I was looking this stuff up, she's been booking roles consistently, even under public scrutiny. She went so far as to become an ACLU ambassador for women's rights and a human rights champion for the UN's Human Rights Office, specifically working on domestic and sexual violence issues. I'm not saying you can't do those things if you're mentally ill. I'm just saying those aren't gigs you can get if you can't hold it together in public, okay? And I just want to throw this out there. I have BPD myself, and I found Curry's description of her to be very one-dimensional. Dr. Curry's testimony gave people the impression that she was basically the cluster B in heels, all because she couldn't stop rambling.
In addition to borderline personality disorder, I understand that you diagnosed another personality disorder. What's that?
So histrionic personality disorder, and these are really two sides of the same coin. They belong to the same cluster. We call these clusters. It's a way to organize personality disorders in that DSM. And this cluster is described as the personality disorders that are dramatic, erratic, and emotional. Okay, so unpredictable. Everything has to do with relationships. They're very similar. Whereas I was saying that borderline personality disorder, a lot of key features that are relate. When it comes to histrionic, a lot of key features are going to drama and shyness. So borderline disorder is other opposite of like issue also. You don't have to
I mean, I love a good lecture on cluster B mental illnesses, but there's a time and a place. There's not a chalkboard behind her. It also pissed me off that she claimed Amber did not have PTSD, but then when asked about it, she proceeded to claim that Amber is malingering because she had too many symptoms of it. Right. Okay. That's the kind of logic an intern would use. It's well known that extreme stress can elevate over reporting scales. Extreme stress such as the entire nation already being against you in an inappropriately televised court battle against a superstar. Plus, that's not how the DSM works anyway. And instead of giving concise testimony, Curry rambles on and on to show the courtroom how smart and educated she is, never giving direct answers, while accusing Amber of being flowery and vague in her speech and needing the spotlight. I just found that interesting, is all. Not diagnosing. And then she simply claims Amber is just exaggerating, hence why she has so many PTSD symptoms. She focuses entirely on symptom over-reporting and not whether the trauma pattern itself was present. She does nothing to debunk that. Her only coherent claim that Amber doesn't have PTSD was that her recurring nightmares started before their marriage, which could rule out getting PTSD from spousal abuse if that was the only diagnostic criteria. But even kids in Psych 101 know there's more to it than that. Amber clearly had enough symptoms for diagnosis, and even if she had all of them before marriage, exposure to new trauma can worsen already existing PTSD. For an example of this being done properly, Dr. Hughes' notes link physical abuse to worsened panic attacks, a common symptom of PTSD. But instead of making connections in her testimony, Dr. Curry referenced possible early trauma shaping personality traits, but without identifying a specific documented traumatic event. Her testimony was like 10% trying to assess Amber's credibility and 90% giving a lecture to the class when she was supposed to be assessing her trauma patterns. I also have other opinions about Dr. Curry's assessment. Yes, I did. As we all know, I studied all this shit in school and out of it. So, yeah, I have opinions, but I'm gonna hold my tongue for now because I could talk about this for 10 hours. So let me just say, if you think Amber made up all of Johnny's abuse in therapy as part of some Gone Girl stunt, also she could write an op-ed that barely implies Depp's existence in order to get revenge on him for something he hadn't done yet. Future crimes, I guess, a la Futurama. That's on you, okay? Dr. Don Hughes spoke to Amber for like more than twice as long and came to the complete opposite conclusion, saying she witnessed very clear psychological traumatic effects during her evaluation. But then again, she didn't have dinner with Johnny Depp. Still, that didn't stop people who were like locked in on this conspiracy from extending their biases from the titular actors to their respective witnesses. Dr. Curry's garbage testimony was praised, while Dr. Hughes was painted as unprofessional and biased, despite her being more qualified in pretty much every way. And while it looked to me like Amber was acting at various points through the trial, the same could be said about Johnny, like to the extreme. Remember earlier in the essay where I mentioned being a Johnny fan? Well, because of that, I know his acting when I see it, okay? He was basically a caricature of himself from start to finish.
Johnny Depp's star power looks as wobbly as Jack Sparrow on a plank. Did I read that right?
You read that very, very well.
The next one, Hollywood Reporter, May 27th.
And Mr. Depp was trying to urinate in the foyer, wasn't he?
No.
Mr. Depp had his penis out of his pants, didn't he?
You poured yourself a mega pint of red wine, correct?
A mega pint?
Yeah.
He turned a trial into a spectacle. It was essentially a publicity stunt. It wasn't that Johnny's behavior was any better than Amber's, it was that his acting was considered more palatable and more entertaining. Plus, he wasn't the one who was put in the position of having to defend himself, really. Another thing I didn't consider at the time was that Amber may have had stage fright, considering the world was watching. And more importantly, they were waiting for her to fall. Okay, engagement with the trial was overwhelmingly pro-Depp. We all remember this. TikTok videos supporting him garnered views in the billions. That courtroom was packed like a stadium with his fans. Pro-Amber videos didn't even make it to my For You page. And all of a sudden, everyone was an amateur detective overanalyzing her blowing her nose. I regret getting swept up in all that nonsense. With her getting sued in that climate, I feel like I can now see clearly why she was acting so unnatural. I don't feel like I would do a better job myself if I were in her shoes. It makes sense that she would look at the jury often, everyone else in that room showed up with the expressed intention to watch her fall down, and then that got used against her in the court of TikTok. Why does she keep looking at the jury? So should she instead look at the judge who irresponsibly decided to televise the trial? The audience that showed up to watch her fall? Was she supposed to look down at the floor the whole time or stare at the walls? Then TikTokers would have said she couldn't look at anyone and that made her guilty. The trial was also very, very popular on YouTube among amateur body language analysts, a pseudoscience I now feel is taken too seriously. I used to think it was okay before, but now I just think it's ugh. When it comes to body language, you can get kind of a general vibe off of it and maybe occasionally suss out lies with other cues, yeah, but it is not real evidence on its own, and people need to stop treating it as such. When it gets to the point when you claim someone must be lying because they're looking at the jury too much, meanwhile the same YouTuber completely forgives Depp and his mega pint in the same video, they've chosen a side, and in order to make their audience happy, they cherry pick. Something I've noticed over the years, Depp's performance never makes you feel uncomfortable, and that's why it's so palatable, because he's an entertainer and he's entertaining you. He knows what he's doing, but when it comes to intimate partner violence, the truth is rarely actually palatable. If anything, these so-called body language analysts should explain where they read victimhood from Johnny's performance. Because if Amber's not acting like a victim, well, neither is he. She could have bawled in that courtroom and they would have just been like, these are guilt tears. Those videos are kind of stupid, guys. That's all I'm gonna get off this horse. Anyway, and as for the judge of the case, she picked her side right from the start, in my opinion, ruling in favor of Depp's team to televise the trial despite the obvious risks. And if you ask me, the fact that this case was televised is tantamount to jury tampering. I strongly feel that the judge came in with a bias for that reason, in my opinion. Amber Heard's team actually objected to this, arguing that broadcasting it would turn it into a circus and intimidate witnesses, and the judge disagreed and allowed it anyway. And guess what happened? It turned into a circus, and the witnesses had their minds made up based on public opinion, in my opinion. Am I to believe an experienced judge didn't know what she was doing? Was this folly or was this intentional? Considering the leaked audio had already set the playing field for the public and she decided to let this trial be aired out to the public, I believe it was intentional, in my opinion. Don't sue me. I'm just some dude. Part 4. Male domestic violence advocacy or misogyny. Another point is that while I am passionate about protecting all survivors of domestic abuse, and that does include men, this trial did absolutely nothing to help male domestic violence survivors like my naive thought it would. I was so happy back then. I actually thought this would be a turning point and things would change. Isn't that f***ing funny? And when that didn't happen, I reevaluated what I had been an unfortunate part of. See, in my opinion, it was never about making male domestic violence survivors more visible. It was instead about reputational damage control and antagonizing Amber with the threat of so much debt she couldn't climb out of it unless she conceded and took his deal not to appeal. I felt it was overkill even back when I believed him because Amber didn't really do much damage to his career, as I explained earlier, and the op-ed barely alluded to him. If it was about money lost from defamation, it would have been an amount she could pay, At the time, I thought, maybe it is about his reputation and his kids. But, looking at it now, it seems like it was mostly about revenge. A way to keep control of her, even after the divorce. Does that make sense? And, the fact that he actually got me feeling sorry for him to the point where I participated in this charade, it makes me want to tear my skin off, but I don't want to make this about me, but, that just shows how good he is at manipulating people. Turns out an award-winning actor is manipulative. I can't believe it took me this long. So what makes me so certain that for most Depp defenders, it's about misogyny and parasocial relationships and not about advocating for male domestic violence survivors or the falsely accused? And it's because this case not only hasn't done anything for domestic violence advocacy, but they have in fact harmed it by spreading so much false information. For example, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. The visibility of your injuries alone is never enough to determine what you've endured. I shouldn't have to even explain why. Like, even if abuse was only physical, which it never is, some people, male or female, have thicker, elastic skin and well-supported blood vessels that aren't prone to breakage. Others don't. And that is determined by your age and genetics, not by how traumatized you are. After claiming that Amber's bruises weren't dark enough for her to be a valid survivor, or that she had just gotten injections and all these other crazy theories, Team Johnny has gotten bored and moved on to the next thing. Meanwhile, Team Amber is still very passionate, and now it's quiet for the facts to surface. And that tells me that people who care about Team Amber do care about victims, and people who are Team Johnny, they care about pirates and 90s nostalgia. And I will continue to fight for domestic violence victims and the falsely accused. The only thing that's changed is that I'm extremely hesitant to count Depp among them. Obviously, they were both nasty to each other, but I feel like I got swept up in a television show. That trial feels so unreal. I can't think of any example of a domestic violence survivor setting out to destroy their abuser in a televised court battle after getting out safely. I genuinely feel like I was just brainwashed by a massive farce, just too busy living my own depressing life, distracted by my own shitty problems, to just stop and think, hey, maybe this is actually fucking insane. And the fact that the majority of the world also fell for it doesn't make me feel any better. The more you think about it, the scarier it is, because yes, advocating for male survivors and the falsely accused is important. And it's also important to remember, though, Depp was always more of a potential threat to Amber than the other way around. Depp had more money, more fame, more connections, more resources. Not to mention a huge age gap as well. And my once blind faith in Johnny also forced me to face my own vulnerabilities as a pre-transition trans man. I haven't transitioned medically yet. It's dangerous to give the wrong man a benefit of a doubt. I doubted that Johnny could truly be such a bad guy, and look what's happened to me since then. I was sexually assaulted repeatedly until I pulled the plug. Why? Because I gave an ugly guy a chance, because he acted harmless and made everyone around me laugh with his dumb jokes. Again, I don't believe in burying a man without evidence. I'm not saying that, but there is evidence. There's so much evidence, and we need to protect the vulnerable with reasonable suspicion in mind anyway, even if we can't always punish the assailant. Our system, it appears to do that on paper, but the Virginia trial is proof it does not work in practice. A man was able to utilize the broken system to get revenge on Amber, I guess, for getting free. Meanwhile, innocent men are in jail and battered women live in hell every day. The justice system does jack shit for survivors. All it is it's for rich people. The justice system is built by rich people for rich people, Amber never went to the public and held some kind of press conference about how Johnny was a wife beater. The news told her story for her based on statements in court that would be relatively private for any other woman. And in the op-ed, Amber barely alluded to Johnny, not so much as mentioning his name, and got destroyed on television for everyone to consume. The whole of the nation cheered as Amber was taken down like the villain of a movie, all because of how cleverly Depp's team used Darvo as a deflective shield, and also probably bot farms, but again, another day. Yes, many of the clips I encountered before the trial did make it sound like Amber was the main abuser, but these clips were out of context, cleverly released by Depp's team to pave the way for the trial, and had he left it at that, I probably wouldn't care enough today to be making a third video on it. I wouldn't even be thinking about Johnny Depp right now. But because he did everything in his power to ruin that woman, I sat down and I thought about it, and I feel brainwashed. He was acting more like a perpetrator than a victim. That's basically why I don't believe him anymore. You know, Amber was just living her life, and then Johnny went for the jugular with this frivolous lawsuit. And for me to ignore that and go on like there was a good reason for all these shenanigans, that would be just world theory in action. I think just world theory is extremely relevant to how people reacted to this case. So what is just world fallacy? It's the logical fallacy where good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And it's hard for people to accept that Amber was doubly punished while Depp got away with profiting off his actions. It would be easy for me to stay Team Johnny when that seems to be what the vast majority of people settled on. It's comfortable. It's more fun to believe there's some kind of a happy ending to this. You know, and people who believe Amber because of that, you know, they're shaking the boat, so they get dismissed as crazy man-haters. But, you know, from looking at the evidence from a common sense angle, it's the only conclusion I can come to, that Johnny did everything in his power to ruin that woman. Not that Amber got away with some Gone Girl scheme for years before finally paying the price, but that the man who owned everything also had all the power and used it to abuse her, in my opinion, or whatever. Even when I was Team Johnny, though, I hated the Gone Girl comparison. Made no sense. But it went viral on TikTok, getting like millions of views. Quite the foresight Amber had to begin fabricating evidence for her Gone Girl scheme back in 2012, telling her therapist about alleged verbal and sexual abuse, knowing she would someday get revenge on him for something that hadn't happened yet by writing an op-ed that barely alluded to his existence. All this for an op-ed. I also, even at the time, thought it was extremely obnoxious that so much energy was wasted on the definition of the word donate. Yes, Amber technically pledged it over a 10-year period, and that's different from donating it. But I do agree with Heard's lawyers. Pledging and donating are used interchangeably in philanthropy, which is about real human connection, not bullshit semantics. Boo-hoo! She said donated instead of pledge. I don't give a fuck. She still came up with $1.3 million, and yes, she got help from the elongated muskrat. Never have I argued that she had good taste in men. And how was she supposed to keep up with her pledge when Depp was suing her for $50 million in a frivolous defamation suit? Of course that froze her ability to donate. Most Americans get set back if their car breaks down. How can you not understand the pressure of a $50 million defamation suit from one of the most famous men in America restricting your ability to keep up with charity? You don't have $50 million, and guess what? Neither did she. And she was paying until the lawsuit, which cost her between $6 and $15 million. And that lawsuit didn't exactly help her book roles. And I'm not factoring in the trauma. Public estimations of her net worth went from $11 million to $1 million because of this trial. Surely you're not that bad at math. Well, okay, actually, I think a lot of Americans may be. Now, I know people can't really agree to disagree nowadays, so I'm probably just gonna lose like a shit ton of followers for this take, but I can't care about that anymore. If you're here because you think I represent just like flat out not believing people who have, again, evidence, lots of evidence, that's not accurate. At this point, the Timothy Heller allegations are the only ones I do not believe that I can think of off the top of my head, and that's only because we found so much evidence contradicting her story. You know, some of my followers seem to think differently, that I'm going to continue defending Depp, or that I'll defend Manson next, or that I'll defend the next alleged monster to cross our paths through the Epstein files, but no. I'm not here to play devil's advocate for powerful men. I'm here to offer my opinion, and my opinion is always subject to change based on the evidence. Depp versus Heard had substantial evidence that a whole courtroom just ignored. And yeah, false allegations are more common than the 2% statistic, but I tend to be more protective of women from men, especially rich men. Yes, men do get abused by women, and my heart breaks for them, yes. But, two things can be true at once, guys. Individual men are victimized, but the matrix of Western society is patriarchal and subjects women as a group. God, that was a mouthful, but stay with me. There are male victims, yes. And also, a majority of violence against women is perpetrated by men. These two things don't negate each other. At the end of the day, a man is a woman's apex predator. We gotta keep that in mind. All of society was designed by this apex predator and for this apex predator. If it makes me a sexist man-hater say that, well, call me a sexist man-hater. See if I give a shit. I say this as a trans man. I've lived two worlds. It's not all men, but it's enough that we should take caution, okay? It's enough men that I get scared when I'm out walking. I'm scared when I'm working. I'm scared when I'm everywhere, okay? And while false allegations do happen, a lot of what Amber has said has been proven true in the UK court. I'm not going to believe him anymore. I don't believe Johnny Depp anymore. Not when Amber has a record of talking privately about Depp's emotional and sexual abuse since 2012. Not when Depp has priors of violent behavior reaching back to 1989, which I can only imagine were deemed irrelevant because they weren't domestic violence charges. However, domestic abusers often act violent outside the home as well, only for it to get brushed off as irrelevant. Men get angry sometimes and lose their head in horseplay. Doesn't mean he's a bad guy, does it? But if you defend yourself as a woman, God fucking forbid. Part 5. The aftermath of the atomic bomb. Unfortunately, there's no legal way for Amber to get out of this because both sides already settled. Depp agreed to drop his overvalued compensation to $1 million. In other words, an amount she could pay, if she agreed not to appeal the judgment. In my opinion, that's basic financial abuse. He never needed $50 million. He needed control over her, and he got it in a way that was over the top and traumatizing. So of course she took the settlement. She didn't take it because she was guilty. She took the settlement because in order to reopen it at this point, she would have to prove that there was some crazy conspiracy going on in the court. Like fraud or something. Fraud. I don't know why I keep coughing. Fraud.
I know how many people will come out and say whatever for him. That's his power. That's why I wrote the op-ed. I was speaking to that phenomenon. How many people will come out in support of him and will fall to his power? He is a very powerful man, and people love currying favor with powerful men.
Currying favor and risking jail time for committing perjury?
Excuse me? I didn't hear your question.
You didn't hear my question?
Ms. Vasquez, if you do mind, please just repeat the question. I didn't hear you.
Curry favor and commit perjury in this courtroom?
I have seen people do this.
Man?
I have seen people do this time and time again.
Legally, the case is closed. However, people like me who merely represent the court of public opinion can, at the very least, retract our statements instead of just being embarrassed for ourselves in silence. If enough of us stand with Amber, I figure she can come back stronger from this and we can fight back against normalizing a culture that turns trials into public spectacles to take down women. So that's why I'm making this video to say, I stand with Amber. I retract my former statements. I was wrong. I no longer believe Johnny Depp. I am disgusted that I let him manipulate me. And most importantly, I apologize to Amber for my involvement in this, cult, basically. But, hey, it's not all sunshine and roses for Johnny Depp either. While he is a talented actor, he cannot facelift his way back to being a 90s heartthrob. His career was already declining before the trial, and it seems that the same trial is now backfiring on him. At first, dropping a bomb on Amber made sense, but then that bomb turned out to be one of nuclear proportions. So now the first thing that people think of when they hear his name isn't Edward Scissorhands, Captain Jack Sparrow, or Gilbert Grape. They think about that viral trial and his mega pint. So now that the dust has settled, there are people like me who used to be big fans saying, wait a minute, and now his legacy will be forever stained. He's right that he will never be just Johnny again, but that's his own damn fault. Meanwhile, Amber is building her own legacy. I ran across it in her patient notes that were unsealed that she wanted to be a mother, and now she is. And she is acting again as well, and I really do hope things go well for her. And I'm not even saying this to like wish the worst upon Johnny, but I can no longer go on supporting him, you know. And sure, Johnny Depp didn't just win in Virginia, but in the court of TikTok, but, you know, winning the meme war. It doesn't erase 12 proven assaults in the UK, or the text, or the imbalance of power, or more importantly, the timeline. I believed him once, I don't anymore. And if that costs me followers, so be it. I welcome Team Amber to join the party, because there are lots of people now that are finally changing their mind, myself among them. Not that any apology can ever fully undo what I participated in, but what I can do going forward is to try to change people's minds like I changed mine. I'm not hyping up films older than me so I can stay putting down a woman who didn't deserve this shit. Amber is not responsible for Depp's dying career. Depp dug his own grave with substance abuse and spousal abuse. I am now boycotting Johnny Depp, Disney, the Hollywood vampires, and any film he appears in. And I've been boycotting J.K. Rowling since 2019. And you know what? Fuck Milani too. I invite you to also join the boycott, as voting with your wallet is more effective than just stewing in your rage. And thank you to my audience, you know, for liking, watching, commenting, and especially my Patreon followers. You guys have kept this channel running even when I am hashtag spiraling and running out of father figures faster than I can run to the liquor store. Sign up for rewards like Discord membership, early videos, exclusive vlogs, and your name in the credits. And to Team Johnny, all I can say at this point is I'm not the type to play pretend to get people to like me. So we'll have to either agree to disagree or it's goodbye. Blessed be, motherfuckers.